So the hot topic in the economy right now is tariffs. How are tariffs going to affect your business? How are they going to affect your investing? And what can you do about it? And of course, at the Wealthability Show, it's all about what can you do about it. And we have an expert on international finance, Josh Phair, with us today. Josh, welcome to the Wealthability Show.
Thanks for having me.
So Josh, if you would, give us a little of your background, because it's a pretty wide background when it comes to finance and economics.
Yeah, so um, I got a degree in risk management out of Florida State in '02 and ended up going into corporate risk management not far from you, right there in Phoenix. And I think I was like 24 years old and I landed a $1 billion gold mining company. And I just brought in resources within the firm to solve their problems. Anything from movement of their gold to construction projects to trade credit to political risk in foreign countries. And then, you solve problems and the CFOs of these companies would then refer me in to the next mining company. And then suddenly within a few years, I'm handling gobs of publicly traded gold, silver, copper mining companies, including doing work for those in Arizona. I worked with Phelps Dodge, which is now
Okay.
Freeport McMoran, Asarco. I think between those two companies, they employ a few thousand employees in Arizona alone. And so kind of fell in love with the metals space. And then in '08, during the financial crisis with real estate, I decided to kind of go out on my own and start what's now known as Scottsdale Mint. So if you kind of fast forward over the last, 16 plus years, my company now actually manufactures, so it does the melting, fabrication, all the creative, the dye work. So we're striking legal tender gold and silver coins for roughly 20 foreign governments and central banks. We produce stuff for private banks that some of the other countries, they actually, like in Canada, you walk into bank branches, you can buy silver bars. And some of them have the bank's name, but my company produces it for them. We also supply wholesalers all around the world, a few hundred of them with gold and silver. We even do licensed products. So we do things for some of the big names, from I can't even say all the names because sometimes they're under other companies' brands, but think of like some of the biggest movie houses, the biggest cartoons, the biggest kids TV shows. We do a lot of that type of work, and so that goes from the investment level to the collectible gifts, all there. And then I also have a vaulting company, and that was kind of partly what moved my company from Scottsdale, Arizona, to Wyoming. I've got a vaulting company called the Wyoming Reserve, and it's essentially a fund. It's an opportunity zone fund, and we hold 90+% of our balance sheet is in gold and silver, physically audited. But we're a high security vault facility, so I'm calling you right now from it. We're also a foreign trade zone, so I know we want to talk about what's in the news, and that's tariffs. So our facility was just designated at the federal level in December. And so we're a few weeks away from what's called activation. And so we're essentially going to be a tariff-free facility for manufacturing and storage. So kind of the background of it. So I'm bringing in gold and silver. I'm working with a lot of the banks in and out. We're supplying it. I don't know everything, but because I'm dialed into a lot of different things, I have interesting perspectives on the world of finance and what's going on.
So let's start with what you're doing there, because there's been some concern. I know of people, they're actually bringing their gold and silver back to their country because they're worried about tariffs when they bring it in. Are you saying that you're in a tariff-free zone? So even if there were a tariff, say on Chinese gold, for example, that you'd be able to bring it into the country tariff-free?
Yeah, so
That's
in
interesting.
other countries, they're known as free ports. And so if
Okay.
you look around the world, Dubai, Zurich, Geneva, Hong Kong, Singapore, they all have free ports. And so free ports are known to hold precious metals, artwork, bespoke collectibles, really expensive
Sure.
wine collections, Picasso paintings, all of the above. The United States really hasn't needed a free port per se because we've been a free trade economy for decades, and but things are changing, and so in theory, you're able to. These have been around since the Roman days. So as governments change how they tax goods and services and all these different things, there's always been what I would call strategic zones for certain economic activity, and
Sure.
so we're one of those. I don't know of any other ones at this level. So in terms of we're set up to hold billions of dollars here from security, from it's beyond airport security. So you're metal profiles coming in and out, X-ray machines, armed guards, audits. The entire building, even the ceiling above me is concrete. So this is it's going to be right now we're around 60,000 square feet. It's going to end up being closer to almost 80,000 here soon with an art gallery and a number of other things that's
So,
coming.
so this is just basically a place people can hold it without having the tariff. But if they then were to actually use it or put in the economy, presumably there would be a tariff at that point, right?
Yeah, so think of it like obviously if you need a product for manufacturing, you need something right away, you're just going to have to pay the tax. But a lot of times alcohol will go to what's called a bonded warehouse. And so
Sure.
let's say you're importing tequila from Mexico and it may sit in a bonded warehouse, and then the distributor is then slowly, as they move it out, as they sell it down, they're at least cash flowing, that taxes over a
Got
time.
it.
A bonded warehouse, though, times out. So you have a limited amount of time, whereas a foreign trade zone is forever. So in theory, someone could bring in artwork or another let's say they put tariffs on gold or silver. It could come here and store here forever. Or it can be manufactured in the facility. I have a manufacturing operation here as well. And then we could ship it back out the United States and never pay a tax. A lot of people are probably going to look at going, hey, tariffs may last a while, but they're usually not forever. They're usually for a season, whether that's a few months, a few years. So you could bring something over, a bespoke collectible artwork, and it just is held here. And then maybe and if I shipped it, let's say to you down in Arizona, the tariff would be due. But you're like, you know what? Let's keep it there. I'd like it maybe in a few years. Let's say tariffs go away, then I ship it to you, and
Interesting.
it's not. But to your point, jurisdiction matters. And I think what we're seeing all around the world is people are moving assets in advance of change. And so what are those changes? So you're seeing a lot of conflict within Europe, differing agreements or ideas of how to settle world conflicts. Europe is talking about creating a army of Europe. And so a lot of assets are now fleeing London. We've seen London was the Bank of England. That's where the gold was pretty much settled after World War
Right.
II. And so a lot of people don't realize we've been off the gold standard since Richard Nixon, just over 50 years. And now suddenly record amount of gold has been flying back to the United States. Just insane amount of gold. And my personal take is that it's the United States. They're repatriating their gold. So, Trump, Elon Musk, they've talked about auditing Fort Knox. Is it there? Is it not? And I don't know. But what I do know is because I'm so intimately involved in the gold industry, and I know all the transport companies, and I know how much has been transported and how hard it is for me to get gold moving. And so I'm essentially having to compete for movement. And I think that's where I was only on X, and I think I signed up for the first time just like 6 weeks ago, and it kind of blew up. I don't know if I was the first, but I might have been one of the first to talk about why is so much gold coming to the United States. And at the time, the thought process was it was tariffs alone. But we kind of look at it a little further, and I say there's other things going on. So often hard assets move before worldwide conflict. So if you look at history, when Germany was moving into France in World War II, they had to get that gold out as a
Right.
midnight move. And it's kind of a wild story. Well, it's hard to move stuff like that. So is gold being repositioned before major conflicts? Is it being repositioned before maybe there's multiple claims on these bars? And so the United States is saying, you know what? Let's bring that material to our facility or into our jurisdiction now, and we own it, and no one else can claim it. Or is the U.S. government going to utilize gold in some sort of new bond issuance? Is it going to be part of the sovereign wealth fund that Trump has announced? There's a lot of reasons we're not really sure. But what I do know is the BRICS countries have been actively acquiring gold over the
Yeah,
last.
if you would for a second, okay, let's I want to get to the
Yeah.
BRICS countries. I'm going to have you explain BRICS because not all of our listeners will know what BRICS is. But first, let's kind of go back to tariffs for a little bit, if we could.
Yeah.
Um, so you said that tariffs are typically seasonal. What in your experience? Uh, so there's some question: is Trump just threatening tariffs? He's actually put some tariffs on, right? They're actually in play right now. Is it, and it's one of those things it can't be an empty threat. You have to be willing to actually impose the tariffs. What do you think is, when Trump says the most beautiful word in the English language is tariff? Why is he so enamored with tariffs?
Um, Great question. So, and when I say seasonality, we just kind of have to look at the United States, and oftentimes, obviously, your political, like who's in leadership, right? Who's in administration. So it can obviously change based on styles. We really haven't had tariffs at this discussion level before. We've kind of maybe we hit. People, and it's usually been the Chinese. They're dumping steel for cheap.
Right,
We've kind of protected certain industries, and a lot of people don't realize is how much tariff is against U.S. goods. So
right,
Trump is wanting to even the playing field, but he's also talking about things like wanting to lower income tax, or I think today he said, "Hey, what do you guys sound? Does it sound good if you make less than 150, no taxes?" So the question is where are you going to get those tax revenues in? And the United States did not have income tax in the first half of its
right.
existence. So it made a lot of its income off of tariffs. And so it might just be a different way that the United States is growing its revenue. And if we look at, I would say part of the reason I also moved to Wyoming into this facility, and I started this process 4 years ago, and I didn't think tariffs would be coming this quickly. But if you look at if anyone's ever read The Fourth Turning, the book, right? It
Yep.
talked about these 80-year
Yeah, we
cycles.
actually had the author on our show here.
Oh, I didn't know that, but that's pretty neat. So, you look at these, I would say these economic resets, right? We're
Right.
hearing things about great resets, and there's different ideas as to what that may look like, but I think we can all agree that the finance industry is broken, right? The
Yep.
US dollar, there's the
Totally.
reserve currency, everything's broken. So we're going to have to go through some sort of transition. So during the Great Depression, they put on the Smoot-Hawley Act, which was a tariff rate of 25 to 50%. And critics would say that at the time, while it was well intentioned that, hey, we're going to do this to reshore manufacturing, and it also may have delayed the economic recovery.
Right.
There's other people that would say, was it done on purpose? So oftentimes, you hear about, the Federal Reserve is kind of wanting to dampen down like economic activity, to move interest rates up and down. They may want to dampen certain things to allow the opportunity to do quantitative easing, quantitative tightening. So tariffs, in theory, could be a short term kind of a pain point. And I think Trump, Elon, they've all talked about this that we could go through a tough transition, maybe for something better. So are we going to see a Smoot-Hawley's type thing? And that lasted for a few years. So where we go more to a universal tariff. So this is my personal take is he's doing the saber rattling. There's a lot of negotiation. And I'd say if you're a friendly, you might be a low tariff rate. Something. Is it 2%? Is it 10%? I don't know. If you're just a medium company, maybe you're mid-tier, and let's say you're not friendly in the United States, you're China, you might be 60 or 80%. So I kind of view it as perhaps this is my take, that where we're going to land maybe a year from now, that we're going to see kind of a tiered system based on how well you play with Trump.
Okay. So let's talk about what tariffs are and what they aren't, because I think people get really confused about the nature of tariffs. And I want to start with tariffs as an inflation. Okay. Because when prices raise, that's not necessarily inflation. Tariffs are a tax. Okay, let's be
Correct.
clear. Tariffs are a tax. And the question is, who are they a tax on? And they are really on a number of people, right? They're certainly on the seller, right? Who's who's bringing the goods into the country, but they're also on the consumer. So it actually has a tax on multiple parties here. But my question for you is, do you think that tariffs will cause a supply and demand issue, or will they just cause a price issue? And the reason I want to distinguish that is because people think inflation is, well, goods go up in price. Well, no, you wouldn't say that if your state raises the sales tax from 8% to 10%. Nobody's going to say the state caused inflation. They added a
Correct.
tax.
Yeah.
And so, or when France puts a 22% value added tax, and I want to come back to that, but they put a 22% value added tax, and it's a tax on imports, but not on exports, right? There's no value added tax on exports. Nobody sees that as inflationary. It's rather just a tax increase, right? It's just an additional tax. So this is my question to you. Do you see tariffs as actually causing, and if we define inflation as it's, supply versus demand, right? And too much money chasing too few goods. Do you think that would actually cause a supply side, or certainly will reduce demand, but which would actually reduce price, would reduce the cost, not increase the price. But do you think it would cause a supply side issue?
Yeah. So great. I think let's look at the egg market real quick. So we had the bird flu scare, whether that was contrived or not by the last administration, who knows? But millions of chickens were killed.
Right.
And so suddenly it was a deflation in egg producing chickens. And so prices went up. And a lot of people are like, so is that inflation? Sort of, but it's just a temporary thing.
Inflation.
Once more chickens are born and they hit maturity and they start laying eggs, right? And we're already seeing the price drop hard just in the last few days. So the reality is that's kind of a short-term imbalance. So, people forget inflation is a policy, and it's the policy of our government, right? So they just keep essentially printing the money supply. So did COVID cause inflation? And the answer is no. In theory,
No, but
economic
the solution
activity,
to COVID did cause
there you go.
inflation.
It was the government's response, and
Yep.
they printed what in the first year, 40% of the money supply alone. So everyone got so excited in the beginning, they're like, my house went up. Well, it did, but everything else went up as well. So no
Right.
one really got ahead unless you're BlackRock and own
Right.
lots of houses, right? So this is kind of a situation where I would say, yeah, in the short term, every industry has what I would say a life cycle. So Trump in his first term played around with some tariffs on China.
Did.
He gave some warning. Obviously, we didn't know how if he would be reelected or 4 years later. But he kind of gave some warning about deleveraging from China. He started doing there in Arizona. They're the two huge multi-billion-dollar
Right.
chip plants, right?
Right.
The Taiwanese, and they just expanded that. They just announced that a few weeks ago. Even more is going to be built. So the reality is that's a multi-year to bring that online. So I think you're going to see if you tariff, let's say, corn or something that could be grown in the United States. So the question is most of the corn that we produce is used for energy and not food.
Right.
So, we may see a short-term, like just rebalancing of what's actually produced in the United States versus imported, and we just kind of move things around. So it is a tax on the consumer, totally, but it's a penalty on the foreign guys. And so it gives opportunity for US business. So I mean, even one of my favorite kombucha drinks is from Australia. Well, if Australia gets hit with 10% or 25%, right, it would provide an opportunity for someone that wants to make kombucha in the United States. So in theory, we're going to go through it. Actually, I see it as there's deflationary aspects that are happening right now in the marketplace, and I would say it's the federal government, right?
Well, so let me go to this deflationary, because I don't know if you read Stephanie Kelton's book, what I call the magic money theory, where you can print all the money you want. You don't even need, you don't even need taxes. You don't need money because you can print it. And especially when you're the reserve currency of the world, really, which the US dollar is. But what I never hear the people who are proponents of that theory, say is that the other side of what she said is she goes, well, if it does start inflation, then what you have to do is you have to tax the inflation away. So taxes are a drag on the economy. They are an absolute drag. If you look at the taxes on your personal on your personal income, that's a drag on your income. And I mean, it's a really big drag. I mean, if I of course run these numbers all the time, and the drag is if people actually knew how big of a drag it was, they would rebel against the income tax. They would completely rebel because it's such a big drag on their wealth and their wealth creation. But so tariffs are a tax. I mean, I think that's very clear. They are a tax. And so would that not put a drag on the economy, right? This is what we're seeing in this. We've seen in the stock market. We're seeing we're seeing prices come down. Isn't that because the tariffs present a drag, which actually should reduce inflation?
Yes, and then the fact that, I mean, if you had to guess in the next couple of years, the federal government, the size, the amount of employees it has, it's going to be dramatically smaller, right? They are just gutting it. And frankly, if you look at it, why is Elon involved? And so Elon understands what's going to be coming with AI, right? And so
Right.
the United States could have only it could wipe out perhaps 90% of the jobs over the next few years. I think that, if you go back and listen to Elon before he got into to politics over the last year, he talked about this, and he talked about universal basic income.
Well, Bill
He,
Gates has talked about this too.
and actually, they even talk about it, universal basic needs. You might not even have income. You might just have these things. So we don't know what this is going to look like, but the reality is some of this can be deflationary. You're seeing like this week, the airline companies are saying, hey, there's way less people flying. Well, guess what? All those federal things that
Right.
there's already less going on, right? And I would also say the tariff uncertainty. If you're a business in the United States and you maybe are sourcing some out, some from China, and you're like, I don't know if I need to fire my staff, hire more people, like it. And so because it's so uncertain, it is causing, I would call this like a short-term, like month liquidity is dropping in theory. It's
Right.
not
So
moving.
that's a deflationary impact.
Yeah. But then I think you're going to see he's going to Trump is pro business, right? He's pro real estate. So we might go through a tougher time in the first part of his term here. And then he's going to just say, maybe we try to get the really tough times over with, and then he's going to try to build it back. And that's when they're already talking about liquidity, an IRS refund. I mean, who doesn't want a refund? But let's be
Right.
frank. What is
Well,
that?
that's what makes taxes fun. Fun's right in the word refund, right?
So that's giving back money to go spend it, right?
Right.
So whether we call it cash for clunkers, the old car program, or we
Yep.
call it it was a stimulus during COVID, suddenly everyone goes out and buys a TV screen at Best Buy or wherever, it's creating jobs and movement of things. So
Yeah.
it
So what do you think about from a timing standpoint? So um, Trump would like the tax bill now. The tax bill is definitely a stimulus. I mean, you put full expensing on equipment, full expensing on research and development. You don't tax tips. That would be a big one actually from a pure stimulus cash. That's basically helicopter money. But you do things like that, then that's a big stimulus. And if you look back to the night to 1981, okay, when Ronald Reagan came into a very similar situation that Trump came into with effectively stagflation, where your economy was just kind of moseying along, but you had high inflation, and then so Volcker puts on high interest rates at the Fed, but at the same time, what most people don't remember is that Reagan, the 1981 Tax Act was a huge stimulus bill. It was a huge stimulus bill. It reduced it impacted this depreciation. Same thing, expensing. He allowed it, and it stimulated the economy. So basically, he had brakes on and the gas on, and it was brakes and gas, brakes and gas. How important do you think it is from a timing standpoint that gas doesn't that Trump and Congress doesn't wait too long for the gas, because that's one of the criticisms, Smoot-Hawley, right? Is that you are already down, and now what you did was depress a down, and you didn't give a stimulus. Whereas
that
Reagan I think what Reagan did brilliantly was he gave a stimulus at the same time he was putting the brakes on.
Uh, yeah, and I'm going to go with there will be some stimulus. They're already floating it. Hey, what does everyone think about an extra $5,000 refund? You've been overtaxed. I mean, so um, this is going to be a rough sled, right? So I think it's well intentioned, but the opportunity of mishaps is extremely high. And I would say you look at like the equity markets, the S&P has never. I mean, the valuations of companies do not make any sense anymore. So, and I'll share with you, we're already seeing it. The Chinese are pulling their money out of our markets. So they represent a big chunk of the Nasdaq in particular. So you look at a lot of these equity markets, I think you're going to see a lot of problems. And unfortunately, that's going to impact consumers. So a lot of retirement accounts, right? Everything's
Right.
based on where your stuff is at. And we haven't seen a lot of volatility in equities over the last number of years. It's just been it's been a pretty nice ride. I know there's been some bumps around, but nothing makes sense. So I would say the opportunity of causing crisis here or there with everything that's going on, and God forbid there's a world conflict. We mentioned the BRICS in a competing world economy. We're leaving globalism, right? And we're kind of going into this, it's a new form of trade. It's going to be a new alliances are going to be formed. And then through that, I would say, I don't think it's going to be easy. And while it might be really well intentioned, I think it could also be very tragic for some if you're not in the right, if you're not positioned well. Those that have too much leverage to debt, right? I mean, we saw this with real estate. Real estate can be amazing, right? But now we're seeing the guys that have office space. It doesn't matter what your interest rate is or isn't. You can't even rent it out anymore, and so
Right.
you hand it back to the bank for $30 a foot. But these buildings are almost worthless at the moment unless you can hold until the market returns, which could be years from now. So yeah, this is going to be a very interesting, exciting time. Like it feels like years are happening in weeks in terms of like what's going on. So
Yeah.
for those like
It is
yourself that are
it is moving at the speed of AI. I'd put it that way. It's moving at the speed of AI. So we thought technology was moving fast. We had no idea how fast Trump could move
crazy.
when he had 4 years to prepare for it. Let's if you would, because I promised we'd explain what BRICS is. Explain now. I know BRICS was actually a made up name by by a bank, but explain what BRICS is and why this is important when it comes to tariffs and what you call the reordering of international trade.
Sure. So BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, right? But there's actually, I think there might be another 30-ish countries
Right.
that are what I would call kind of like they're on the wait list. And so, if you think about it, the United States was a free trade society, right? Where things went in and out, and there were times the United States did great, but you also look at like since the 70s, right? The quality of life for Americans has gone down. Like so, if you just look at what your purchasing power versus wages, so a lot of that wealth transformation left for other places, such as China. So
Right.
we're now entering a world where globalism is over, and that basically, I would say, what did that was when Russia Ukraine conflict hit, a couple years ago. A lot of people don't realize that the assets of Russia were seized all over the world. So if you were in the SWIFT banking system, so if you go to your bank and you send money via ACH or bank wire, right, that's all within the network. Well, anything attached to that network was seized. I mean, they went as far as taking boats and yachts and planes and of anyone, right, all around the world. And I think the other countries, the other BRICS nations looked at this and said, wait a minute. So if someone doesn't like what we do or don't do, you mean someone can just take and seize all our money, and
Yeah.
seize all our assets? So that, whether that was right or wrong,
It
here's
was
where
a
we're
wake
at.
up call.
It's a wake up call. And so
Right.
they do these meetings, and Trump, it started right before Christmas. He posted on X and he says, a warning shot to the BRICS: do not create a competing new currency to the US dollar and don't back it. And that's key. A lot of people didn't really realize, well,
Right,
what's he
because they
talking about?
wanted to back it with commodities, right?
Gold.
That's their proposal is to back it with commodities, gold or some other commodity like grain.
That's right. That's right. So, it feels a bit like, could we have a resurgence of Axis and allies, right? We're in
Mm,
a world conflict today.
right.
But the World War I to World War II, some people changed sides, and so it's been more of a trade war and it's been a proxy war. So a lot of people don't really realize that who is funding the Ukraine-Russia conflict, right? There's distinct people, but they're not putting boots on the ground, right? So Starmer in the UK is talking about we might have to send British troops to Ukraine. Well, the moment you do that, you're now igniting the possibility of a bomb dropping on
Right.
London, right? That
Right.
that 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 it's not 0% now. You're not only funding something, but now you're actively involved in it. So it feels like to me, we've had and really the trade war, right? We're having all kinds of stuff going on. I mean, remember the umbrella balloon thing that was flying
Yeah.
across, the
Yep.
spy thing over the United States? Remember ships were crashing into each other in the
Yep.
sea? That was GPS taking over ships, and people are playing. This is kind of war game-ish, but next level, right? And so we're seeing, the pressuring of Taiwan. What's going to happen with the Taiwan? Well, like, do we want to send American, children to fight for Taiwan? I mean, what does that mean? Do we want a nuclear world? This no one wins. So I think what's happening is it's a realignment of partnerships. It's a realignment of food resources, and this is what Canada is all about, and Greenland is all about. They're strategic locations. They have strategic natural resources such as rare earth minerals, gold and silver, et cetera. And China's locked up a lot of Africa over the last few decades. The United States was kind of asleep on it. So there's no doubt in Ukraine is massive for wheat and fertilizer and all types of other minerals. So why does Russia want it? So you're seeing this is just new to where globalism, you trade with everybody. But the last couple of years, you're saying, hey, if you're on the sanction list, you're on the no go. I can't send it to you. So you can't buy certain goods and services. So you got to have redundancy. And so this is where I would say, Trump is trying to get the United States to be more insulated, right? And when you have places like Canada and Mexico who haven't been acting like great neighbors, right? I mean, Mexico's a narco-run state, right? They're the child sex trafficking, the
Yep.
drugs, so obviously we'd rather have them as a partner. So is the tariff thing kind of a punch in the gut? Get your act together, right? So we can be more friendly. And really the same thing, and this is the problem I think with Canada, they've been more aligned with Davos, right? Even the
Right.
new prime minister is from the Bank
Right.
of England, right? He's not even really a Canadian. So uh I don't know how much of a fan I am of just making a 51st state, but even just the theory of like, hey, we need to partner up for this, whatever new world we are going into, whether that's kinetic, or even just at a trade level. Let's be partners. And so I think Trump is punching, but that's his
That's
MO,
his
right?
style. Yeah.
That's his
It is.
style.
So,
Yeah,
so you mentioned a couple of times here that there are people going to get hurt, and they're going to get hurt bad if they're not prepared. So, what are some things that you think a business owner, an investor can do to prepare for this, and so that they can weather this, and even actually be successful with it?
man, that's kind of that's broad because everyone's got a different situation.
Well,
Every
give us three things.
um I'm a big fan of low debt to no debt as possible, right? Because no one's your master. When you have a master, they tell you what you can and can't do, or the rates change when the term comes up. So I would say deleveraging away from those that could
Thing.
potentially hurt things. Pay attention to where are you sourcing things, right? If you're doing things in China, you should be moving so fast away. And in my company, I'm having companies all around the world that the last 2 months they have been flying here and they're saying, hey, I make this here and this there. We need you to make as much of it as possible. So if you're not doing that, you're already, I'd say, get going right now. And I think it's just getting things in order. And I think people are already starting to do that, right? They're taking a little less vacations right now. There's just a lot of uncertainty and it doesn't feel good. So Obviously, I'm a
So
hard
defensive positions.
defensive position. I'm a hard asset guy, and actually, so I mean, obviously, I'm in the
Well,
gold.
gold's right around 3,000 right now. So
It is. But if the central banks all around the world are buying it, this has not been a consumer-driven rise. So
right.
it's gone up. But I can tell you, the retail market has been pretty quiet for about 16, 17 months. It's just starting to pick up in the last like 2 weeks, but it's all been driven by central banks. So central banks have much of nothing on their balance sheet. They just print fiat for the country they
Right.
represent, but then they have gold holdings. So I would say historically, gold holdings has been anywhere between maybe 40% all the way down to single digits. And so we've been kind of in that low end where the average has been very, very low gold to fiat. So what they're doing now is bringing up gold. So they're raising it. So we mentioned China. Poland actually was the largest buyer of gold in 2024. And I would say that's kind of interesting. They've been buying a lot of the gold at the US Fed. I would say this in the event of, think of gold as it's the most pristine form of capital. It's now called, with Basel III coming, which is a new banking accord that starts this summer. If you have physical gold on your balance sheets, it's a zero risk asset, which is this. So this is huge. So it means if you own an ETF of gold, you don't get full credit of that. So the physical gold ownership is big. So I would say follow in the footsteps of the giants. So if what they're doing, they're de-risking and they're adding tier one assets. You've got right now the state of Wyoming, the state of Utah. Right now they're adding gold to their own balance sheets, right? So it's an interesting time in the world.
Well, and Utah's actually a few years ago made gold legal tender.
They did.
You can pay
Yep.
your taxes in gold, which in the U.S. At the federal level you cannot. You have to pay in dollars, which is what gives the dollar actually its core value, is
Yep.
the requirement to pay taxes. Uh, Final words. First of all, how can we find you? And what could we learn? To learn more from what you do and your study of hard assets and the world markets.
Yeah, so you can follow me personally. I'm pretty new on X. It's Josh Philip Phair. You'll find me on X, and then my two companies I've talked about, ScottsdaleMint.com is that's the company we produce, manufacture, and we ship out gold and silver products, gifts, all investment stuff. And then my other company, which is the vaulting company, is thewyomingrreserve.com. So we do third-party vaulting for institutions, high net worth people, but we're also a Reg D offering with special tax advantages. And we do work with our RA firms. We're registered through FINRA SEC, so it's being sold to the broker-dealer community. It has some awesome tax advantages, liquidity. It's not a solicitation here, but I'm just filling you in on what we're doing here. But yeah, those are kind of the things that I'm involved with right now.
I appreciate that. So Josh Phair, ScottsdaleMint.com. And remember, people think, well, why are we talking about, tariffs and gold and the impact of inflation? These are real things, and they impact our business on a daily level and on a real level. And if we understand what's going on, the whole idea is how do we prepare for it? And in this case, what I'm hearing you just say, Josh, is this is a time to be defensive, right? Back in the 2000 teens, right? We were being aggressive. We had zero interest rates, basically. We wanted to be aggressive. Now we're seeing, and debt was good, because that hedges inflation. But if you're in a more deflationary period, that of course actually goes the other direction. So a little bit of defense can go a long ways. Any good professional sports team knows that. And so a little defense, paired with the right kind of offense, will always get you to way more money, way more money and way less tax. We'll see y'all next time on the Wealth Ability Show.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.